When the time comes, we must be ready.
When every second counts.
Be ready.
Act fast.
Do not give up.
Push hard. Keep pushing when it's all on the line.
Be there for each other.
Give it everything you've got.
Do more for your team.
Be ready.
Stay ready. Call 911. Be ready.
Be ready.
Be ready.
Be ready. Be ready. Call 911.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here tonight for this very important webinar on cardiac emergency response planning. My name is Lisa Neff, and I am a Senior Community Impact Director for the American Heart Association's Eastern States region, based here in Buffalo, New York, and will be serving as your moderator tonight. What brings you all here tonight is the devastating fact that according to the most recent published scientific data, only 90% of the 350,000 people who experience a cardiac arrest outside of the hospital each year will not survive. Put another way, that means only 1 in 10 people will survive, and the vast majority of cardiac arrest victims will never even make it to an emergency room. Unfortunately, 7 in 10 people in America say they feel powerless to act in the face of a cardiac emergency, and as a result, less than half of all people who need the life-saving skills receive CPR from bystanders before professional help arrives. But we can work to change those statistics. The American Heart Association is committed to turning a nation of bystanders into a nation of lifesavers and doubling the survival rate of cardiac arrest by 2030. Each of us has the power in our own hands to respond to a sudden cardiac arrest. We simply need to know what to do and have the confidence to act. Because most people who have a cardiac arrest aren't surrounded by trained professionals in CPR, the American Heart Association, along with amazing supporters like the Buffalo Bills and Wegmans, work tirelessly to ensure everyone, everywhere, has the skills to save a life. That means knowing how to properly perform CPR and being aware of automated external defibrillators, or AEDs, and using them and having a plan to put it all together. Again, our heartfelt thanks to the support of these organizations that you see on the screen. I do have a few housekeeping items, and we are going to just make sure that the chat box is open for everybody. Let's make sure that that is working. We are going to use the chat box this evening and drop some resource links in there, and we want you to be engaged as well. Even though this is a webinar and sometimes we can't do a lot of interaction, please utilize the chat box. We also have a Q&A feature that you can utilize as well. And just to make sure you are testing it and make sure everyone knows how to use it, let's go ahead and have everyone introduce themselves in the chat. Again, make sure you select everyone, and only the panelists and us hosts will be able to see it. We will be monitoring the chat box for questions throughout the webinar. And if you do have any technical issues, please raise your hand and an American Heart Association staff will connect with you. And continue spreading awareness about the importance of learning CPR and invite others to be part of the nation of lifesavers. Our social media handles are seen on the screen. Feel free to post pictures, share your stories, and tag us at AHA New York. Again, that's at AHA New York spelled out. Now, it is my absolute pleasure tonight to introduce our two speakers. First up, we have Dr. Les Bassan, an accomplished orthopedic surgeon. Dr. Bassan holds several positions, including the June A. and Eugene R. Mendel Professor and Chair of the Department of Orthopedics at the Jacobs School, Medical Director and Team Orthopedic Surgeon for the Buffalo Bills and Buffalo Sabres, Team Orthopedic for SUNY Buffalo State, and President of UBMD Orthopedic and Sports Medicine. He has lectured nationally and internationally, published dozens of peer-reviewed articles, and serves on the editorial boards of high-impact sports medicine scientific journals. Earlier this year, Dr. Passan and the medical team of the Buffalo Bills were recognized for their life-saving emergency response to the collapse of Bills safety, Damar Hamlin. They were honored with the Pat Tillman Award for service at the ESPY Awards, an NFL Honors Award, the American Heart Association Heart Saver Hero CPR Award, among several others. In the aftermath of Hamlin's recovery from cardiac arrest, Dr. Passan has spearheaded an effort to bring hands-only CPR training to Buffalo's historically underserved communities. Dr. Passan, welcome. And when we talk about the importance of having a cardiac emergency response plan in place, what does it mean to you to be ready?
Thanks, Lisa. It means that you need people, equipment, and a plan. As a sports medicine surgeon and team doctor, I'm often the first one on the injury scene when there are a lot of people watching. I can take us through 3 high-profile events that I've been involved in to illustrate how we approach things and how that can be put into practice in everyday events. Not all of these are cardiac arrest, but all are connected by the same basic principles. People who have some degree of training, some simple equipment, and a fairly simple plan. So September 9th of 2007, I was one of the first people on the field after Kevin Everett collapsed and was completely paralyzed after hitting his head while making a tackle. And if you could hit the next slide, Lisa. That's what it looks like when we got him onto the spine board. You can see the ambulance on the field. We're putting him on a stretcher and taking him off to get his definitive care. But again, he was completely paralyzed, not moving any of his forelimbs after that injury. Can you hit the next one? It was only a few months after that I was one of the first responders to Richard Zednick. He was on the Florida Panthers. I'm the team physician for the Buffalo Sabres as well. He was cut in the carotid artery by a skate during the Sabres game against the Panthers and was profusely bleeding, basically bleeding to death at that time. And you can see he's starting to get some care. So can you hit the next slide? In January 2nd of 2023, this year, I again was one of the first responders to attend to Damar Hamlin when he suffered a cardiac arrest after being hit in the chest while making a tackle. Next slide, please. And that's what it looked like there in Cincinnati as he's on the left there being loaded into the ambulance. And then that's a bunch of us team staff and other coaches, personnel, saying a prayer for Damar when he was on his way to the hospital. Next slide. Now, December 23rd of 2007, Kevin Everett walked back onto the field at the Buffalo Bills Stadium under his own power and waved to the ovation of the crowd. Next slide. October 10th of 2008, Richard Zednick returned to the NHL and played in his first regular season game with the Florida Panthers. And next slide. I think we all know April 18th of this year, Damar Hamlin was fully cleared to return to NFL football. And the picture there on the left is the two of us on the sidelines at the beginning of the Super Bowl. So next slide. How does this happen? Next one. What goes on behind the scenes to make that happen? Next, please. How do you get good outcomes from such catastrophes? And next. Can we get to the point where these outcomes are possible everywhere? Next slide. So I'm going to talk about how the pros prepare for athletic emergencies, and I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to speak here tonight. Next, please. So we might start with the question, how would we make Western New York the safest place to play sports? Next. And we might start by asking, well, where's the safest place to play organized sports right now? And maybe we could model our solution after that. Next slide. So that's a professional sports game. And if you hit the next one, I would say that it's the NFL. So next slide, please. Why is the NFL so safe? Next. It's trained personnel with proper equipment following a plan. Next slide. So there's a lot of resources that we have in the NFL. We talk about the team behind the team, and there are 30 game day medical staff that are present, 4 athletic trainers for each team, 2 primary care physicians for each team, 2 orthopedists for each team, a chiropractor, and what we call an unaffiliated neurotrauma consultant, or UNC. They basically are the ones that evaluate alongside the primary care physician for the team, the players for concussion, to sort of provide an independent opinion. So there's those at the top times two. And then there are also members of a stadium medical team. So independent. My slides, I think, just dropped, Lisa.
Yep, give me one moment. I went offline. You should be back on now.
Can you go back one?
Yep.
Perfect, thanks. So that's the visiting and home team medical staff, but then there are also members of the stadium medical team. So that includes an ophthalmologist, EMTs, an airway management physician, what we call an emergency response physician, dentist, x-ray technicians, people that are up in the booth watching for concussion. So there are a lot of trained personnel at an NFL game is the point that I would make. And if you hit the next slide, I can show you some of our personnel that work with us for the Buffalo Bills. Brian Clemency, who's an emergency medicine physician. We've got our paramedics, and that's one of our unaffiliated neurologic consultants that's there with the paramedics. If you hit the next slide, you can see on the left and on the right, it's pretty much the same. That's the Buffalo Bills medical and training staff. That's after we won the division. And then on the right is when we were acknowledged before in the games for helping to save DeMar. And you can see the threes outlined, for the DeMar number 3 in blue. So there's a lot of people resources that the NFL has is the point that I would make. Can you hit the next slide? There's also equipment. So equipment is important. We're dealing with equipment in football. We're dealing with helmets and shoulder pads. In ice hockey, we're dealing with helmets and shoulder pads and shin pads and all these other things. There's equipment that we have like AEDs and defibrillators. And if you hit the next slide, it's simple, but it's important. We've got things to remove a face mask and equipment to remove a helmet, things to cut off shoulder pads, to secure an airway. We've got defibrillators and an AED that's available. There's a spine board in case there is any significant spine trauma. Next slide. And we have a plan. This is the Buffalo Bills 2022-23 emergency action plan. It's about 18 to 20 pages long. It talks about what we would do in the case of a cardiac arrest, neurologic trauma, limb trauma, anything that's life or limb threatening. Talks about lightning. It talks about heat-related illness. So we've got that plan. And if you hit the next slide, we work through that plan. We practice it. This slide here, that the bald-headed guy in the blue shirt there is that's me. I'm working with the Sabres medical staff. We've got a person that's got some hockey stuff on, and we're going through a practice rescue, and getting them on a spine board. So we practice these things. We communicate with each other. Can you hit the next slide? And that's very important at the NFL level. Often I'm a doctor that's taking care of the team in a new stadium, in a stadium that we don't usually go to, or that we haven't gone through the emergency action plan. There are different paramedics in that there. So one thing we do is we introduce all the people. The referees introduce themselves, and we introduce the medical staff to the referees. We go around in a big circle introducing the athletic trainers, the unaffiliated neurologic consultant, the emergency response physician who would run a code, airway management people, and the paramedics. If you could hit the next slide. We talk about our equipment. So where is the ambulance? Where's a transport cart? Where's a spine board? Where are the things to save a life? Advanced airway equipment, defibrillator. For heat-related situations, where the cold tub is, if we've got to plunge somebody, x-ray machine and technician, and what the emergency access is and exit for an ambulance and where they're going if they leave the facility. So we, again, just are communicating people, equipment, and a plan. Can you hit the next one? And then we review the emergency action plan. What we do if there's a severe trauma, a neurologic emergency, a cardiac arrest, who's running those different things, what we do in case of concussion, and if we have to get any medications that they don't have, that the paramedics don't have, how we go about that. Next slide, please. And we learn from these things. We did a debrief, league-wide debrief after the DeMar Hamlin arrest, because that's very rare in the NFL. The thing that I would highlight here is that prompt recognition, immediate CPR, and early defibrillation saves lives. Our medical team it had some accolades for recognizing very quickly that he was in cardiac arrest. Well, that's because we practiced it. We talked about it. We said, what does this look like? If we see it, we reviewed those things. And then when we saw it in an NFL game, we said, this is a cardiac arrest. Let's start doing the cardiac arrest things. Next slide, please. So if you look at the place where I would say that it's probably the safest place to have a cardiac arrest outside of, say, an operating room or an intensive care unit, and you want to bridge the gap and take that and bring it down to the level of high school and youth sports, it's the same themes. You need people that know what to do, you need some equipment, and you need a plan. Now, you don't need a bunch of doctors to do CPR. Coaches are required as high school coaches to learn CPR in Western New York. But I think that it's, just even learning hands-only CPR as youth coaches, they should know it. Referees, athletes, family members, community members. There are a lot of people that are at a sporting event that can save someone's life if they know what to do. So we should train the personnel. The equipment is fairly simple. A cell phone to call 911 is really the only piece of equipment that you really need, because when you call 911, an AED is on its way. They're going to come with a defibrillator. Now, if you happen to know where one is and they're publicly available and you can get to one quickly, that's even better because you'll get it there faster. And then the team, the plan can be as simple as call 911, push hard and fast, and send somebody for an AED. That's a plan right there. And the rehearsal doesn't have to be a bunch of people rehearsing something. Each individual can just go through in their head what they would do if there were a cardiac arrest. If I saw somebody have a cardiac arrest right now, what would I do? I'd call 911, I'd start pushing on their chest, and I'd send somebody for an AED. That's a plan, and that's a rehearsal. Next slide, please. So what does success look like if we're going to get from where we are now to this sort of successful place? I would say that success looks like a person suffers cardiac arrest in any community in Western New York, and everybody knows what to do, which again, call 911, push hard and fast, and send someone for an AED, and does it. And this is one way that we can get there. This is one of the hands-only CPR events that we held. There's about 100 people in this gym. I'm showing you 2 stations there, but there are 10 people at each station. We've got 10 stations, and we trained, I think, about 400 people that day pretty quickly in less than an hour in hands-only CPR and AED use. And that's one way that you would get there. Next slide, please, Lisa. So there are some challenges, right? We don't have everybody trained right now. So we need to train more people. We need to not only get AEDs out and around, but we have to make sure that they're maintained, and we have to make it easy for people to find them, right? And then there's an information gap just in terms of what to do, and there's a lack of an emergency action plan. But again, there are some innovative solutions to get there. Can you advance again? So what are some of the ways that we would get there? Well, we'd offer basic training for coaches, referees, and athletes. We'd have ways to get to publicly available AEDs rapidly. And I would tell you that you don't have to have an AED at your site to have a plan. If you call 911, an AED is going to come to you. And if you can also identify where the closest one is to your organization publicly, then you'll allow somebody to get there, you'll facilitate somebody getting there faster. This, and when we talk about a template EAP, this is one of the things that we'll hand out at our training sessions. So when we do these at a different school, we'll get these Silastic wristbands in the school colors, and they've got the plan on them. It's basically 911, compressions, and AED. So that's a template EAP, and you can do those for organizations or hand those out for individuals as well. Next slide, please. So these are some of the initiatives that our organization is currently working on. We've got what we call an athletic training outreach program. We've had that for close to, I think, 2 decades, at least more than 10 years, where we've got 30 athletic trainers that go to a variety of schools around Western New York and take care of the athletes and do the sideline management and take care of them during the week. We're leveraging that ATC outreach program to bring hands-only CPR and AED training. That was those were a couple of our athletic trainers that I showed in that picture that showed people getting trained in the gym. And we're providing hands-only CPR training to a lot of schools in historically underserved communities. And we do that at the beginning of the seasonal orientation meeting. So that was right after one of the fall sports orientation meetings. And I think that might have been at Lockport High School. But we'll take less than 2 minutes. We'll address the crowd, tell them what to do, and then say, hey, everybody, just come on out here for a minute and push on some mannequins and kind of get that muscle memory and know what to do. So we're using our athletic training outreach program to deliver that. We're doing awareness events. We did an awareness event in Juneteenth. We've done them at the Buffalo Public Schools showcase for the 8th graders when they go and decide what school they're going to go to. We've created some educational videos. We've got a couple of the Bills trainers in an educational video that shows some of the players learning CPR. We're planning future awareness events. We're also creating pilot programs to expand access, looking at things like training coaches to deliver hands-only CPR training to their athletes so we can go at scale and it's no longer limited to just the trainers going around and doing it. We're collaborating with the UB School of Law to look at ways to improve access to AEDs and also really sort of decrease any organizational liability if there's a problem with the AED. And we just recently got a grant from the Mother Cabrini Foundation to take our hands-only CPR training into the underserved community Buffalo schools again for this upcoming spring and then the fall season for next year. So those are some of the things that we're working on right now to try to make that vision a reality. Can you hit the next one, Lisa? I think that's the last slide. So I appreciate everybody paying attention and listening for a few minutes. That slide on the left there is one of our medical students who is helping somebody to learn a little bit of hands-only CPR training at Juneteenth. And this is the type of a flyer that we'll put out. We've got a grant to incentivize people to do the practicing on mannequins. We're giving away Bills tickets. We've got hundreds of $50 Tops gift cards that we give out. We've got this QR code that will show people how to access videos, including those that are produced by the AHA. And we're trying to move that vision to a reality. So again, thanks for your attention, and I'll mute and listen to our next segment.
Dr. Bassan, thank you so much. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. A quick reminder and apology, the chat box is open for all attendees now. Please make sure when you're chatting in the Zoom chat that you select everyone. Otherwise, your comments will only be seen by the host and those of us on the back end. So please, again, make sure that you check that you are messaging things to everyone in the chat box. And we are going to move on to our next guest, Dr. Jeremy Cushman. A paramedic and emergency medical services physician, Dr. Cushman is professor and chief of the Division of Pre-Hospital Medicine at the University of Rochester. He serves as EMS medical director for the Monroe-Livingston region, Monroe County, City of Rochester, and dozens of fire, EMS, and law enforcement agencies, while providing medical support and field response for all first responders. Dr. Cushman, you wear many hats and have been instrumental in developing emergency action plans and AED implementation in many different organizations. Can you talk to us a bit more from your perspective on working and partnering with EMS in plan development?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Lisa. And thanks again for having me and for the opportunity to actually really kind of get down into some of the nitty gritty and some really practical considerations when implementing your plan. Dr. Bassan spoke obviously quite eloquently about the key components that every one of you in your organizations has to be able to do this. And I think sometimes at the organizational level, you're like, oh, my goodness, it's too complicated. Like, I mean, who do I go to? How do I make all these things happen? So I'm going to drill really deeply, hopefully, into some of the practical considerations when implementing your SERP. And as Dr. Bassan mentioned, it doesn't even necessarily have to include AEDs. We want it to, but having a plan is the single most important thing. So the next slide, Lisa. So I know we have some guests from outside of New York, so some of what I'm going to say is very New York specific. But suffice to say is that there are actually some laws and regulation, depending on what state you are in, as to where you must place an AED. So, for example, in the state of New York, public schools, state-owned buildings, health clubs with memberships greater than 500, public gathering locations, public surf beaches with lifeguards and so forth are required by law or statute to have an AED in place and to have individuals trained in that. And you're probably looking at that and you're going, well, public gathering locations, like what is that? It is, of course, it's law, so it's defined, right? It's stadiums, ballparks, gymnasiums, field houses, arenas, civic centers, and so forth that have the capacity of at least 1,000 people. Concert halls, recital halls, theaters, and so forth are included in that. Interestingly enough, places of worship, religious organization, granges, public associations, free libraries, and so forth are actually not required, again, in the state of New York to do that. There are some general and local laws that may be in place. So, for example, in New York City, there are some very specific local laws that have been passed that require the presence of AEDs in, for example, transit facilities and so forth. So, my guess, though, is that the vast majority of you that are joining us tonight aren't here because you have to place an AED, but rather because you want to. And I think the context of all that becomes important in that although about 3/4 or about 75% of cardiac arrests happen in the home, the population that we're talking about is the 16% or so of cardiac arrests that happen in a public place. And that's where we have the most profound impact in that, because one of the key things to survival is simply recognizing that a cardiac arrest has happened. And it goes without saying that if you're in a public place, you're slightly more likely to do that. And that's why everything that Dr. Besson said earlier is so important, is that you identify it, that you know to call 911, and that in and of itself is a really, really important intervention. Lisa, next slide, please. When we get into public access AED placement, we are really talking about, again, every state is somewhat unique, but they all generally have these key components. This stuff is specific to New York, where you have to identify an emergency healthcare provider, which is a physician in which you develop a collaborative agreement. Now, that sounds really, really daunting, but there are a ton of templates for these. And at least within the state of New York, there are 18 regional EMS councils that one of their charges is to help facilitate that. And that link is in there, and we can provide that elsewhere to be able to do that. So the key thing here is that there are friends to help you with this process. And that becomes important because this is truly a collaboration. You heard from Dr. Besson how many people are involved and how many people are communicating with each other before the game starts, both literally and figuratively. And that includes everyone. It includes the refs. It includes the stadium medical staff and so forth. That a lot of this is engaging your public safety infrastructure, because they can be a huge, huge asset for that. And it can be daunting trying to figure out, geez, which AED do I get? The good news is that if it's marketed in the United States, the AED is FDA approved. So you do have some checks and balances within that to be assured that the device that you are purchasing or obtaining is at least meeting a minimum standard. And honestly, they all work, thankfully, very much the same. And more importantly, that we identify a training program on how to teach folks. And obviously, the American Heart Association has the industry standard as it comes to training our individuals in CPR. Next slide. But I have to address the elephant in the room, because particularly amongst some organizations, the concern is, oh my, you know what? Yeah, it's a good idea, but man, this is going to bring a liability to our organization. What if we have an AED and somebody, I don't know, puts the pads on somebody's head or something silly like that? The answer is in all 50 states that there are liability protections generally under the state's Good Samaritan law. In New York State, there you go. You have the citation that any person or entity that purchases, operates, or facilitates the implementation of that shall not be liable for damages. And so, again, every state in the country has those protections. But of course, like everything, you're not protected from gross negligence. And how does that how does that get reflected on the individual and the organizational level? Well, at the individual level, again, if you in good faith are utilizing the device, and you are covered under the Good Samaritan statutes. As an organization, you are covered when you are providing that device and somebody decides to put the pads in the wrong place. That's not the organization's responsibility. However, you as an organization are responsible if you decide to put that AED on the shelf and forget about it for 3 years, and somebody goes to use it and the batteries are dead or the pads are out. And so that's why building some of this stuff, as I'll speak to in a few minutes, is an important key part of that plan. So next slide. So planning, you heard from Dr. Bassan how important planning is, and having had a little bit of insight into the NFL over the years and some stadium medical support, I can absolutely attest to you that everything he said is not only, of course, true, but their model for pre-planning incidents on the field is second to none and is truly the standard by which a lot of organizations set themselves. But I also recognize that most of you don't work in that world. Most of you are not engaging or responding to cardiac arrests on a daily basis like I am as an EMS physician. And so I think one of the most important things that you can do as part of your planning components is engaging your local first responders, particularly your fire and or EMS agency, because they can really, really help, based upon their experience and their knowledge, help guide you through some of these steps, become really valuable partners that we'll talk about later on. Identifying potential AED locations is also a really important part of your plan. Obviously, in indoor settings, we want them accessible. We want them visible. We want them close to high-risk areas. Where are those high-risk areas? Where people congregate. If that could be a gym, that could be an auditorium, right? We don't necessarily want it way off in the distance. And ideally, we want these devices within about 2 minutes walking distance of that building. And that becomes important when you're looking at very, very large facilities. Where can people navigate through to be able to get to that? The other thing, and this is kind of embarrassing, but I can tell you, having worked with a number of locations, sometimes I find their AED and it's down here. It's in the desk drawer, which of course nobody knows about. And that's what I mean by a fixed, purpose-specific, visible location. And identifying, where is a good spot for that, and where is everybody going to see it? An office, somebody's desk drawer is obviously not the place. But think about where, what time of day, what areas of the building do people have access to? Where are people? Because knowing that information, as I'll share with you in a few minutes, becomes really, really important. Now, outdoor locations become important, right? Certainly, Dr. Bassan and his team get to work in a stadium that is actually relatively controlled. They're out there for relatively short periods of time. It is always 80 degrees and sunny in Buffalo for all of their home games, so they don't have to worry about temperature variations and so forth. But we know that many of you may be wanting to have an AED out on your athletic field. And there's really two options for that. One is to have just a seasonal fixed location where you're able to identify whether it's a bathroom house, whether it's a training room. It might be even a concession stand in many cases, where you can have a fixed, again, purpose-specific, visible and central location where hey, it's just going to be out there during the summer, and in the typical New York winters, we're going to pull it in. In some cases, many of you as athletic trainers and so forth may be moving a golf cart around. Well, again, it's really, really important that folks know that there's an AED on there. You know that, but maybe not everybody else knows that. And I've seen everything from stickers on the windshield to even flags on the golf cart that help identify that there is an AED there, so other members of your team know where that is, particularly in mobile locations. But consistency and importantly, accessibility, you're seeing, becomes a theme. Next slide. The other part of this is honestly, even not even 10 years ago, we just thought about AEDs. Now, I work with a ton of organizations and really bundle all of these things. In fact, just working with an institution recently to make sure that we have Narcan in all of their on-campus AED locations at an institution of higher learning. So we've moved away from just having an AED, but thinking about what are other things that a bystander can do, and that is Narcan, and that is importantly stop the bleed, and stop the bleed materials. So think larger than just AED, but think about Narcan, stop the bleed programs. How does that integrate with your opportunity to save a life, whether it's from cardiac arrest, an opiate overdose, or heaven forbid, an injury or an act of violence? That some of that may change a little bit what you put in there. No, Lisa, you were right on right there. So the other part about this, when you're thinking about the planning stage, is you might have a small planning group and you're like, I think that this is a great place. Vet it and almost test it with some of your colleagues. You want to walk around and ask, hey, if you needed an AED, where would you look? You'd be surprised what answers come up in play. If you have a building that has 24-hour occupancy, would everybody have access to that? Do you have restricted door access? Do you have different restrictions on that I can't imagine, being able to look through a window and see an AED on the other side of a locked door. So think about those. Signage is really, really important, and obviously placing those to be able to achieve the goals. But signage is imperative so that folks know where that life-saving station is, or that AED is related to that. And as Dr. Bisson said, and this is perfect, they review the plan with everybody that could potentially be involved. And so I would ask, not only are you involving your plan with the rest of your team, but that you are reviewing that community response plan with your first responders. And what that comes down to is identifying particularly access points to your buildings, fields, things like that. I still respond to emergency calls on a regular basis, and it's really difficult when you're directed into the east entrance and there are 7 doors on the east entrance of the building. We don't necessarily know which one that is. And so sometimes, certainly most schools have things numbered or lettered now, but identify what are the best points for responders to be able to access that. Fields are the other thing. Playing fields often have colloquial names based off of donors or players or whatnot. First responders may not know where that is. We might not know that the upper field is actually not quite the upper field. It's the field over to the upper left, and the high field is over to the right. You get the point, is that the more that you can identify those access points and what they're called and so forth becomes important. And even to the extent you can, share maps of buildings and fields and so forth with our responders. Nowadays, we will digitize those. We will put those in our dispatch systems so that we can pull them up when we get a 911 call and be able to identify, oh, hey, that's exactly where they're going. We're going to direct responders there. And then lastly, as part of your plan, really determine where flaggers or folks that can wave down responders should be located to escort responders. Some of the school districts that I work with do a phenomenal job with this, where literally it's a breadcrumb. There is a school district personnel, teacher, administrator, whatnot, at every corner, and they don't leave that spot. That's what's great about it. So we get there, somebody's at the door, actually out in the parking lot waving us in. And it's literally a series of breadcrumbs where they can direct me, and they stay there the entire time until all the responders leave. Because I've certainly been there where when we get to the patient and everybody's disappeared, and then honestly, I have no idea how to get out of the building with my patient because I don't know the building. So really kind of thinking through some of those processes and so forth. Lisa, next slide. Like I mentioned before, the importance of collaboration, I cannot overstate enough, because you heard Dr. Bisson, right? We want you to start by calling 911. It's the single most important thing that you can do. But most of our 911 centers have the ability and often integrate with our systems to know where these AEDs are. So this is why registering your AED through whatever process within your community is set up becomes so important. My office has about 1,600 AEDs registered through it. And all of those AED locations we put into our 911 center. So you may not even know that there's an AED in that building, but when you call 911 and you say that I'm at 321 Main Street, we can say, you know what, there's an AED at the front entrance. And most importantly, we can also coach you through all of the steps of providing CPR, to applying the AED, to stopping the bleed, or even delivering babies. That's what our 911 center operators are trained to do, which, hey, let's face it, you may have never done CPR before, and frankly, I hope you never have to, but I hope that you're trained to be able to. You might need a few pointers again. Many of our 911 centers around the country may be integrating with alerting applications. There are applications through phones and otherwise that can alert individuals that have self-identified themselves as wanting to know if there's a cardiac arrest in their vicinity, to help with that response. And like I said before, if we know what that common location or name or location is, we can get responders there that much quicker and right to your side to take over the great work that you're doing with CPR. Like I said before, your plan can really allow you to pre-plan access points and response routes through that. But most importantly, that collaboration allows you to engage other folks that have a ton of resources that you may not have. You may not have a bunch of mannequins or CPR training devices to be able to train all of your staff. Your fire department, EMS agency, in some cases even your law enforcement agencies may have that and may be more than happy to come do that. I have a school district on Monday where we're going in and doing some stop the bleed and some CPR refresher training for them. For the athletic trainers that are on here, the interface between EMS and pre-hospital care and how you operate as an athletic trainer. There are some similarities, but honestly, there are a few differences there as well. And our EMS responders need to understand your processes and protocols, just as you may benefit from knowing what some of their equipment or resources are as well. So it's a great source of training and collaboration there as well. Next slide, Lisa. It's really important to start thinking at the beginning, how do we sustain this program? I think all too often we have a donor, we have someone that says, yeah, we need to get an AED here, and the AED gets there and it sits on the wall and collects dust, or worse yet, it ends up in a desk drawer somewhere. And so you should be thinking right at the beginning, how are we going to sustain this program? And truly, your program may start just with a plan and we can't even afford an AED yet. That's okay. It's what's most important is that you have a plan. And then as you identify resources to be able to get one AED and then maybe two AEDs and so forth to be able to cover the footprint of your geography, it's okay. You don't have to go in all in at once. You can work towards the end goal, right? Which is getting as many people trained in CPR as possible and making sure that there's an accessible AED within that public access area. And so thinking about establishing that regular assessment of equipment and signage. Is it still on the wall? Did somebody rip it off for whatever reason? Assign it as a job responsibility to someone within the organization. Schedule those equipment checks and training at regular intervals. Those equipment checks may happen on a monthly or even quarterly basis, but certainly no less than quarterly. And that's just checking on it, just as you may be checking on other life-saving devices like locks, like fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, and other things. And start establishing that training cadence at a regular interval that works best for the organization's schedule. And then start thinking right at the beginning, how, heaven forbid we have to use this, how how are we going to replace the AD pads? The AD pads are eventually going to expire. What is that expiration schedule? Do we have a budget line, or do we have a way of being able to do that? Start thinking through that at the beginning. It shouldn't be a deal stopper, but the more that you can do this in the beginning, you're not all of a sudden with an AED whose pads and batteries have expired. Next slide. And obviously, the real work starts once you establish that program. And I realize that you're like, wow, that's a lot of planning and so forth, and it is, but it really gets you in the mindset of how can we help each other? How can we help our coworkers? How can we help our community members? How can we create a plan that is really all hazards? And we're thinking about cardiac arrest, but let's face it, this plan is responding to really any emergency. It's identifying that an emergency has occurred. It's calling 911. It's getting responders there. And to the extent that you have the resources and training, that we're stopping bleeding, starting CPR, utilizing an AED. So practice it, both announced and unannounced drills. And I would strongly encourage you, anytime you have an emergency response to your building, your facility, your center, use that opportunity to debrief. Hey, is there anything that we missed? Is there anything that we could do better? Engage your local responders as well. Hey, did you know what door you were coming through? Wow, we didn't realize that door is locked and you couldn't get back in. Don't wait, if you will, for the Super Bowl, which bad analogy, I guess, for that cardiac arrest in your community. But utilize every engagement with the 911 center, no matter what the acuity is, to be able to look through, did our process work? Did our plan work? Do we need to tweak this? Do we need to train differently on this moving forward? So again, I hope that provides some context for the nitty-gritty of pulling together this plan, particularly within the context of the great work that Dr. Basson and his team does, and frankly, the model that we all want to achieve there. And with that, I think we're gonna take some Q&A for you all.
You've got it. I'm going to ask Dr. Basson to join us back on screen. Thank you. I see you joining. I did see that we had one question in the chat box already. I guess I might pose this to you first, Dr. Cushman. And again, I encourage everybody, please put questions in the chat box. We do also have the Q&A feature, but also if you do want to raise your hand to be pulled off mute to verbally ask a question instead, if that is preferred for you, one of our co-hosts can do that this evening as well. The question that we have is, do you have recommendations on keeping outdoor AEDs accessible in areas where theft is a real possibility?
Yeah, sure. That absolutely a valid concern. You know, as a physician, we often try to look at the evidence when we're making some of these decisions. And honestly, there's not a ton of evidence, but the rate of theft of AEDs is actually not nearly what you would expect it is. When you're looking at an outdoor location where you are concerned about that, that's where perhaps investing in an alarmed AED box becomes important. So let's face it, there's a couple different ways we can do this. We can put a sign up on the shelf. You wouldn't do it in the office because that's a closed space, right? Where we're going to put an AED. But you'll notice in many cases in some public places, most airports have these as well, is that there's a box, and it does look like it's got a little speaker on it. It's got a little whirly light and stuff like that, where if you pull open that box, it is going to alarm. That by and large is a massive deterrent because obviously once you open up the box, it's going to alarm and it tends to scare people away. So if you have to go that route, that is one way to approach that. Also, again, kind of look at, are there other places that are highly visible, have, I don't want to say surveillance, but has a lot of public activity and so forth that's moving around there that might be a little bit further away from where you really want it. But in the end, you're going to be assured that it's going to be there 100% of the time. That's going to help drive some of those decisions. But great question.
Another question that came in that I think you actually just started to touch on a little bit there. And actually, Dr. Basson, I might ask you this as well in terms of stadium facilities and other locations. The question was, on some of the publicly available AEDs, it does state on the unit, especially in airports and other locations, for trained users only. What is that? I think you kind of mentioned about the Good Samaritan law earlier. Are there restrictions of individuals utilizing those or not?
No, right. I'm not the lawyer, but again, we absolutely see those. I think it is important, however, right, that let's just say that you are trained in hands-only CPR. First off, thank you, and teach your friends. Second off, if you don't know how to use an AED, the last thing that I want you to do is taking hands off the chest to try to figure out how to use an AED. I want you to stay on that chest and keep doing that CPR and those compressions until we get somebody there that does. And so, although there are, to my knowledge, no legal implications for trained users only, the reality is that compressions are just as, if not more important than utilizing that AED if you don't have the hands to be able to do it.
Yeah, and I would add to that the AEDs, you don't want to call anything idiot proof, right? But you open the AED or you push the big button, that's the power button, and it starts talking to you and telling you what to do. So it's designed to train you to use it.
Do we have any more questions in the chat right now?
I can say something while you're looking in the chat.
Thank you.
Dr. Cushman, great talk. That was I thought that was outstanding, and really enjoyed it. And I think you covered a lot of incredibly important material. So I know that this is recorded. Hopefully people will look through it again and act on a lot of the information that you gave.
No, I appreciate that. And again, we all know the principles. I think sometimes we get mired in the details of how to put it into practice. A lot of folks have done this and have learned the hard way what works well and what doesn't. Certainly we're happy to help however we can. You've seen some of the great stuff that Dr. Basson's team has done to try to promote community CPR, and that still remains hugely important. And that is part of your plan. It's not just how our 911 responders are going to be able to access that location. It's how are we going to promote everybody recognizing that a cardiac arrest has happened, calling 911, starting compressions, and then ideally accessing and utilizing that AED so that we can achieve that goal.
Wonderful. At this time, I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat box. I would really love to ask each of you do you have any other final parting words that you'd like to provide all of us tonight with your expertise?
Yeah, I'd throw in two bits. One of the things that we say, I know a lot of the people on the webinar probably know this, but as far as CPR is concerned, we'll say doing anything is better than nothing, right? You don't want to have somebody that is suffering a cardiac arrest and you're just looking at them. So the first thing is do something, right? Call 911, shake them, but if you're listening to this, then I would tell you, start doing chest compressions. There are a lot of people, I think, on this webinar that are leaders in some way. So I would look at it from there's the individual perspective of begin CPR, do anything rather than do nothing. If you're a leader of an organization, take the next step. Do anything right now rather than ending the webinar and continuing your life the way it is. Change something, take that next step. As a leader, you can do things at scale. So you can make the organization that you lead, you can make hands-only CPR available to them. You can get an AED. You can start talking about a plan. There's 1,000 out-of-hospital cardiac arrests a day in the United States. I know that Lisa brought that up in the beginning, so it's happening a lot. Organizational level training and AED access, even if you don't get one, if you just identify the places that they're publicly available as close to your organization as possible, that is going to save someone's life. It's happening enough that if you're a big enough organization and you get the people knowing what to do, that equals at least one life saved. It has to be worth that investment, and it doesn't take a ton to do it. Little small bits. So take that next step and do anything rather than do nothing.
How do you follow that up? Well said from my colleague. And just to emphasize, it's not if, but when. And so again, as Dr. Basson mentioned, you are organizational leaders in one capacity or another. And so number one, it's not if, but when. And number two, it's so critical that because it's not if, but when, that the efforts that you do now are seen within that organization as caring for the people, your coworkers, those that are around you every day, and your customers or your clients that you serve. It is not an expectation per se, but it speaks quietly but loudly at the same time about your commitment to your community's health and your commitment to your employees' well-being, that these things are there to affect their ability to live, frankly, if the worst day of their life happens to them or someone else. And because we have Dr. Basson, I think, and his lead in the beginning, I will leave you with the phrase, obviously, no good team meets in the huddle, right? And that is absolutely critical when it comes to this, putting together your plan and engaging your community partners, whether it's first responders, the HA, and others, in building that plan, leveraging things that already exist, putting your own name and your own brand on it, and getting it out to the community that you're served. So thank you again, HA, Dr. Basson, for sharing your story and your experiences so that we can hopefully all walk away from this and do something to save a life.
Perfect.
Thank you both so much. You are both just incredible, and we thank you for your support of the American Heart Association and sharing your knowledge on creating actionable plans. This evening, we want to again thank the sponsors that you see on the screen. Without their help supporting the American Heart Association, we wouldn't be able to transform a nation of bystanders into a nation of lifesavers. And of course, thank you to all of you for attending this evening. I truly hope that you take the words that you heard tonight and put them into action and make your plans so that you are prepared and everyone around you is prepared should the worst happen. Thank you for asking your questions and being engaging. The recording of tonight's webinar will be shared to registered participants when it's available after closed captioning has been provided with it, and it will also be posted on the Eastern States YouTube channel. For more information and downloadable cardiac emergency response planning resources, please visit heart.org/CERP. Again, that's heart.org/CERP. And as always, if you need additional support and resources, please reach out to your local American Heart Association representatives. We are here to help you. And with that, I want to say have a wonderful evening, and thank you, everyone.